Indonesia. If you compare electric bikes to regular bikes, there's about 125 million petrol bikes. There's 35,000 electric vehicles, right? So it's 0.00003%. They realize you also need to get into the customer's hands really quickly. And so they spent $100 billion and 24 years building Prime delivery.
Yeah. I think only 10% of YC companies are solo founders or less. But there's definitely merit to it. So yeah. All right. Well, welcome to Next Big Wave. On today's episode, I'm talking to Saivya Chauhan. So Saivya is a founder from India, originally studied in the US, and now is working on a company in Indonesia, in Jakarta more specifically. We have a lot of things to discuss today, but one of the things that interested me immediately was that you were an iterative founder just like myself. And for me, that's a big vouch of quality. So I'm super excited to get into today's episode. Saivya is working on Blitz Electric right now, but before that, he was working at Hyperloop Transportation. So I'm super excited to talk about that because it's not often that we get someone who's worked on such exciting projects at such a young age. So Saivya, without further ado, thanks for being on the show.
No, thanks so much for having me, Tim. Lovely to be here.
So if you don't mind, in your own words, I think it's always best that way. Could you give us a background on your, studies and then work history and what led you to start your own company in the end?
For sure. So I studied in the US. I went to a university called the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It was pretty cool up there. And I mainly majored in mechanical engineering. I did do a couple of other minors. But during my stint there, I was part of this club called the Badger Loop. Now, Badger Loop is basically Wisconsin and my university's version of Hyperloop because our mascot was the Badger, and so they made Hyperloop into Badger Loop. And this was a space pod competition sponsored by SpaceX. And so SpaceX, and I think Elon they were the first ones to kind of envision, or rather reinvigorate this interest in Hyperloop. Hyperloop idea had been around for quite a while. But I think Elon wrote a white paper and then SpaceX kind of ran with it. So they basically hosted this pod competition called the Badger Loop. And that was my first foray into who Elon Musk is, what SpaceX is, what is even Hyperloop in the first place. So that's how I got involved in Hyperloop. And then one thing led to another. And then suddenly I was actually working for one of the SpaceX's competitors, and that's Hyperloop TT. So they had a very interesting model where they would take literally anybody and everybody because they were trying to popularize a remote working model where you have your full day job. Let's say you're working at NASA or you're working as a mechanical engineer or you're a student. And if you have certain skills that they would like to use, well, they would basically let you work as part-time for Hyperloop. And so as a result, I was amongst 1,000 other people working globally for Hyperloop before remote working was a thing. And we were all paid in stock or stock options. And that's how I got into Hyperloop, right? So I would do some work in Wisconsin remotely. And then I would do in-person work in Los Angeles. And so that was my entry point into Hyperloop. And I had the idea to do Blitz in Hyperloop itself because I was in LA one day and I saw all these electric scooters sort of running around. And that was the catalyst that sparked because I actually grew up in Indonesia as well. So I'm originally from India. Actually, I moved around a lot, right? Because my family was in the Navy, and so I moved around quite a bit. And so eventually, when my father settled on land, we moved to Southeast Asia, right? And I wanted to bring that electric scooter idea back. The thing I saw in LA, I wanted to bring that back to Southeast Asia. And although that's not what I'm doing right now, that was what initially sparked Blitz. And in fact, if you look at our logo, right, there's some crosses in the B. And the reason for that is because that was the actual area I used to live in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, where I had the idea. So the logo designer actually incorporated that elements of that into the final logo.
That's awesome.
But yeah, that's a little bit of background on myself.
Love it. And if you don't mind, tell us about Blitz then, because it's not an electric scooter company. And by the way, you're one of the first people to tell me you saw electric scooters in LA and you got inspired, because everyone else I talk to hates them, with a passion.
Man, so I think back in the day, right? This was 2016 to 2018. That's when the huge boom for EV scooters was happening. that was actually my first foray into learning more about startups. So like, yes, Hyperloop was a company on its own too, and I learned about fundraising from them. I learned about VCs from them
Mm-hmm.
because I would ask to sit in meetings with investors and not talk, and they would my engineering director let me. But I saw these electric scooters, and I was very curious as to why they exist. And at the time, I thought it's a great option, an alternative for tourists
Yep.
because they were advertising it more as a commuter vehicle, but I wanted to bring it more to tourist places in Southeast Asia, like Bali, Koh Samui, Pattaya, things like that. And so I thought the idea was great, but perhaps the execution in LA may not have been the best. It was also essentially they were toys from China that they were importing and then branding as their whatever the brand was, and then it was hurting people because they were a nuisance. But I thought
Yep.
if you could mitigate all of that, build stronger scooters, build them more robustly, and then launch them in a way that doesn't cause a hindrance to the city goers, then perhaps it could work. And off that idea, I managed to fundraise my first round, which was actually on like a Shark Tank copycat,
Mm-hmm.
and this was like 2019, and that's what led to Blitz today. So we evolved from doing electric scooters for tourism and into electric vehicles for logistics, and COVID had a bit of a hand in what that was. But you had asked the question, you know, what exactly is Blitz doing today? Well, put it simply, we are enabling electric vehicle adoption through the commercial sector, and our go-to market is logistics. So in a very, very simple term, we do deliveries in electric vehicles, but there are many different aspects of the business that can be kind of elaborated more on. It's a bit more nuanced than that, but put it simply,
Mm-hmm.
we do deliveries on electric scooters right now. That's what the business is.
But you provide you enable it, right? You don't actually own the fleets or anything like that.
Correct.
You do the software around it, right?
Correct. So that's another thing that I realized over the learnings of the last many years, right? Is that hardware is very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to be a EV company, you need a lot of upfront capital, hundreds of millions, if you really want to be successful. And if you look at the electric scooter companies in LA, their history, they raised hundreds of millions, and that's how they managed to kind of popularize those. So I learned that the hard way when I the funds that I had weren't sufficient for a hardware company, and so and it was also COVID during this time. So what we ended up doing is pivoting from hardware first and then software to software only, with the hardware being enabled through other third parties, right? So then our partnerships became a lot stronger and more important. So today we have a lot of EV manufacturing partners. They're the best at making vehicles, and I'm the best in enabling them. So we work together instead of us trying to do everything in one go.
So walk me through the user journey though for someone who uses Blitz. You have the manufacturers who produce the electric vehicles, and it's for delivery, right? So are you pairing them with like delivery companies like Food Panda, or like do you have your own delivery company? Like what exactly? Where do you service your clients essentially?
Okay, very good question. So there's actually so our business has two components, as you correctly pointed out. There's the EV component and then there's the logistics component. Each exists for its own reason. Let's dissect the EV portion first. If you look at a country like India, India has had fantastic EV adoption over the last 10 years. US undoubtedly one of the best ones in terms of adoption, as is Europe, the whole continent, and then China also doing really well in EV adoption. In fact, every motorbike in China today is electric. They made it a law 14 years ago. It had to be electric. So, noting that, you would imagine that the largest country in Southeast Asia, fourth largest in the world, Indonesia, would also be up there. Not the case. Indonesia has one of the most poorest EV adoption rates. Let's compare it to India, right? India today,
Mm-hmm.
they sell about 2 million EVs a year collectively. I think electric motorbikes is about a million, and that's annual sales. And the reason India was so successful is because they enabled their B2C market first. Government provided subsidies, banking institutions provided financing, and as a result, you had options to be able to afford electric vehicles with subsidies and financing for the everyday Joe. This included gig workers.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to hierarchy them in terms of earnings, they're rather in the lower end. They're blue collar workers, right? So if the gig worker can afford it, then you have a boom, because then the mass market can definitely afford EVs. Indonesia, over the last 9 years, the collective number of EVs in the country, not annually sold, is 40,000, non-existent essentially. If you compare electric bikes to regular bikes, there's about 125 million petrol bikes. There's 35,000 electric vehicles, right? So it's 0.00003%. It's non-existent. Why? Because the four ingredients you need for an EV market to be successful are missing here. Number one, there's no subsidy for the buyer. Number two, there's no subsidy for the maker of the EVs, the seller, or the manufacturer. It's actually a luxury product more than anything, so it's double taxed. There are no charging infrastructure present, and there's no financing options available. When you don't have either of these four, or even just two of them, it's very difficult for a low-income worker to ever get into EV and mass adoption to take place. So as a result, you have all this hype around EV for Indonesia. There's about 200 manufacturers. There was a startup recently that raised 40 million. They have no product, no revenue. They raised 40 million to make EVs and no go-to-market strategy. So you have all this hype, but it's one of the most interesting cases of, yes, there's capital in the EV world, but zero penetration and zero effective way to actually make money. And so what you have is manufacturers kind of sitting on inventory, underutilized, unable to actually sell it to the mass market, because when the mass market can't afford it, there's nothing you can do. You could make the cheapest vehicle, but if the people that you're selling it to can't afford it feasibly, it makes it difficult to have them, right? So that's the EV problem over here of adoption. Now, how does this link to our business? Well, that's what we figured out. The best way to enable EV adoption is through the commercial sector, through logistics. So there's two ways to do this. Either you go to a ride-sharing company and you tell them, hey, you're a ride-sharing company. I will give you a lot of the electric bikes. You create the income. You create the market for these drivers to earn well, and then we can make money together. This only works if that ride-sharing company's business model actually allows you to earn well. And unfortunately, in today's times, when ride-sharing companies are under pressure for profitability and have removed driver subsidies, their drivers are not earning at all. If you were to look at the bell curve of drivers earning, it's very skewed. And in fact, the thing that sparked Blitz 2.0, what we're doing today, was my conversations with drivers, gig workers during COVID. And I would ask them, how they're dealing in the circumstances. And they would basically tell me that they still have to work during COVID. They have to interact with people, yet their earnings are not enough. And at first I didn't think about it, but then I saw that actually everywhere you go in news articles, gig work is rising. Number of deliveries is rising. We're stuck at home ordering things. So you would naturally think that the guy that's earning per delivery to do that job would earn more because he's getting more deliveries. But actually the opposite was true, because these companies weren't able to sustainably allocate their deliveries to every driver, number one. And number two, they had also maliciously increased their margins at the expense of the driver. So a combination of these two things led to the gig workers complaining about low income and effectively no means to finance their gasoline or finance their daily food. So now you have established two gaps in the market. You have a gap in the EV market where adoption is not happening. And there's a gap in the last mile delivery market where the gig workers are unable to actually fulfill deliveries on time or earn more because of how inefficiently it is designed, because it's not designed for increasing the driver's income. So what we have effectively done, and I know this is a very long-winded way of answering a question about what it is that what the customer journey looks like, is we've effectively created two products. The first product is for the gig worker, and the second product is for the actual company that is using us. The company that is using us, right? Why are they using us? Is because if you look at the last mile delivery market, or if you look at just the general consumerism today, everything is now. Everything we experience, from the movies that we watch to the music that we listen to, the transportation that we use, is now. I can call an Uber, it comes in 20 minutes, or actually comes in seconds. I can open up Spotify, listen to whatever song I want, and it's available immediately. For movies, I can open up any platform today, and oftentimes, these days, the movie in the theater is playing on the platform. We call it the nod economy. And the same trend is true in logistics. Now, Amazon figured this out. Amazon figured out that if you were to invest into shorter delivery times, you will attract more consumers to your marketplace. And so in order to beat out Walmart shopping or anything else, rather than just having a large inventory, they realize you also need to get into the customer's hands really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so they spent $100 billion and 24 years building Prime delivery. And so Amazon Prime is now one of their main attracting points for when a customer joins their marketplace. Now so basically they realize shorter deliveries drive demand. Now that is still missing in Southeast Asia. Retailers here have not figured out how to replicate Amazon Prime. And that's mainly because of the same logistic company that we were talking about earlier, who are inefficient, unable to allocate packages well, and effectively unable to do same day or instant delivery properly. So when you're stuck and when you're beholden to somebody on the outside, as a retailer in Southeast Asia, it's very difficult for me to then try to do instant or same day delivery, even though my customers want that. And if I wanted to invest into my own vehicles, my manpower, my logistics supply, it's not that straightforward. It's not simple to just build your own logistic department. So they're still just kind of stuck. So that's the gap in logistics market that we identified, is that customers, businesses want to deliver faster. Unfortunately, there's no way to do it. And so what we sell to the businesses is a plug-and-play solution. You white label Blitz and you white label our tools, and overnight you can enable same day or instant delivery for whatever product you have. Medicine, check. Fish, live, dead, frozen, check. Groceries, check. Doesn't matter. Regular e-commerce goods, check. So you can work with us, white label us, and we enable instant and same day delivery for you. That's the product that I'm selling. But the way in which we are able to do that effectively is by prioritizing the driver's needs. We do that by using electric vehicles. We do that by helping these drivers get financing. We do that by making sure that our tech ensures that the drivers get a certain baseline number of deliveries, and then the EVs help them with their costs, which helps me accomplish the main objective, is that how do you increase these drivers' margins? Well, either you can increase their income or you can decrease their cost, or you do both. So that's why we use EVs in logistics. Effectively, in very short, right? The product that we sell is we can help any business deliver instantly within a couple of hours through a plug-and-play like solution. But we effectively have to become your internal department. We become your internal logistics department. You don't have to invest anything.
The question I have, and I'm not super familiar with EVs, but is it really the cost savings on electricity versus fuel? Does it really amortize the extra cost of the actual hardware when it comes to, like you're saying, reducing your overall cost? Like when you amortize a bike over, I don't know, 2 years, whatever it is, that saving on electricity versus fuel is enough to compensate for the extra cost of the bike. Is that right?
Absolutely,
Or
because
more, right?
actually it's a lot more. But the way we price it is, if a gig worker, to compared to his gasoline bike, the amount he has to spend on gasoline that day, well, if he spent that money on the EV financing, he gets the bike after 3 years. So he's effectively spending the same amount for the first 3 years. But after 3 years, his cost savings improve immediately, tremendously. This is a very standardized installment plan. Solar companies do this. So do other EV companies. And so we've kind of followed the trend where you're spending the same as you are today, but over time, that cost saving becomes more and more apparent.
But what about the lifetime of a bike? Again, I'm not super familiar, but I can think of a few things like batteries wear out. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that needs to be replaced. Second thing I can think of is, and this is an issue in North America, is that without a supercharger system or infrastructure, your batteries, actually for bikes, I guess you can replace batteries a lot easier than on a car. So is that the way you operate? They have places where they can just battery swap during the day, or what have you figured out in terms of improving logistics in that way?
So one of the things that you have to realize is that for logistics, the bike itself has to be rather heavy duty. So we do end up taking a lot more expensive bikes, which also translates
Right.
to them lasting longer. There are cheaper bikes available. We've had manufacturers that manufacture like the Toyota type bikes, but we can't use them because we don't really need a Toyota. We need more like a Range Rover, or rather a cheaper version of a Range Rover, at that analogy, right? So we do use a little bit more heavy duty in terms of the bikes, and that allows the lifetime of the bike to be a lot longer. So far, we have seen from the manufacturer, at least the warranties last up to 8 to 10 years, depending on the various
Okay.
components. Batteries themselves, 8 years. And yes, the batteries are swappable. In the unique thing about a motorbike, you can just remove the damn battery. And when you remove the battery, you basically remove the engine. And that allows you to refurbish the vehicle very quickly, very cheaply. That's another advantage that EVs have over gasoline vehicles. And you can't, yes, you can remove an engine in a car or a motorcycle, but it's not a straightforward process. In a bike, you just open the seat, pull it out, put a new one in, and ready to good to go.
Okay, so and your vision with this EV, did you have a sustainable sort of angle initially, or was it always about cost savings for the drivers and helping out in that way?
The catalyst was cost savings for sure. It's just that the emission ended up being a byproduct of that. Though that was never the initial intention. And based on the reaction that we received, that also tends to be what drives the market too. Is more on how much cost saving can your product bring me
For sure, for
versus
sure.
ESG benefits.
Sweet. And so, you went through iterative, your winter 2024. So you basically graduated not too long ago, right? Your demo day must have been a month or two ago.
Exactly a month, 2 months ago, in fact, early May.
So tell me about where you are now, if you can talk about like how far along you are in terms of metrics, KPIs, how much have you raised, etc., and where are you headed?
Well, for sure. So you could categorize this as like a pre-Series A company today. This idea itself, the pivot to logistics, is about 3 years old.
Okay.
In idea, 2 years old in operation, right? So I consider the company to be 3 years old technically, but 2 years since we actually started generating revenue. And so since then, we've had about 2 rounds of funding, a pre-seed round and then a seed round. We haven't raised much compared to what you see in the news in terms of other companies. We raised about just below 2.5 million so far. And predominantly that has gone into helping us expand nationwide. So we're nationwide in terms of coverage. We cover anything and everything, right? Whether it's your fashion items or your e-commerce goods, um, we can do it. Or if it's your pizza or your coffee or your medicine, right? If it's being delivered, it's probably being delivered by us. Now, you will never see our name anywhere. You'll always see my client's name, and it will be under their delivery brand. But we're the ones kind of enabling them from the back end. So you can think of us like AWS.
Right.
And demo day was good. Demo day was really good. We got a lot of traction then, and we're now in the middle of closing this current round that we're raising.
Congrats. I look forward to seeing that in the next press release, I guess, then.
Me
And
too. I'm
so
also looking forward to that.
I bet, like as a founder, I mean, you don't want to sort of praise fundraising for no reason, but it is kind of fun when it finally happens, and especially all the stress. The stress of fundraising goes away, and now the stress of scaling comes in again. It's a forever cycle, right? But do you have any
You know better than
ambitions
anybody.
outside of Indonesia? Yeah, I've been there a couple times.
You know better than anybody, right? Like fundraising, I think 3, 4 times in terms of total collective cycle.
Yep, yep, definitely. And I think the toughest fundraising for me, if we're going that direction, was the first angel round. Like
Mm.
it was absolutely insane. Namely because Southeast Asia was still so new in terms of venture. We didn't have, well, the Philippines was way worse off than Indonesia. Indonesia was already making headlines, a lot of VC money, but Philippines was absolute no man's land when it came to investing. And there was just no money in the Philippines to begin with. So we started raising money from people across Southeast Asia. Singapore was a bit more shy, but you know who were really great investors at the time? Angel investors were people in India. So we started expanding our outreach to India. And the reason was that a lot of Indians had already invested in the Philippines via lending, like informal
Mm-hmm.
lending, let's say. So they had that experience. And we realized when we talked to them that they 100% understood our business model. And they were like, okay, you're just a technology version of what I already know very well, that Indians have invested in that type of lending in the Philippines for 50 years, let's say. You're just building tech on top of it. And that was really, really handy when we figured out that this was the avenue to do it. But yeah, fundraising can be a nightmare. I get it. So look forward to your success there. Okay, so my question before we started talking about that was, you mentioned you're nationwide in Indonesia, and we all know Indonesia is a massive market on its own. Do you have any ambitions to move out of Indonesia? You mentioned earlier that you wanted to build this electric scooter company in Thailand, actually, Koh Samui, Pattaya, and all.
Mm.
So, any plans to build anything outside of Indonesia for now, or you plan to spend a few years to dominate the market locally first?
Uh, I think it's a bit of a slippery slope when you think about international expansion. It could honestly go either way.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have plans to expand? Yes. My investor relations answer is yeah. We would like to be a regional player, a global player, right? But to do it effectively is also key because what I've noticed, at least in Indonesia, is that companies here become very complacent with Indonesia and oh, it's the largest country in the Southeast Asia region. Let's focus on it here. And you've seen this in very public examples of it, where large companies get complacent and their competitors they capture everything else in Southeast Asia and they come back and then they beat them here in Indonesia. And so that happened in ride sharing, that happened in e-commerce, and the companies here that were considered the dominant ones are now dying actually as a result, right? So it can go either way. Either you can get too complacent or you can get too hasty. You expand too fast and then you're neither good there nor you're good here, and then you end up closing shop. So I think it's just a matter of getting the right insight. And that's why for me, it's important that the people that we're bringing on board the company as shareholders have relevant experience, good and bad, in these kind of things. And funny thing is, quite a lot of time it comes from angel investors. So I actually like to bring in a couple of angels every round because I find that the angels can give a lot more value for time and money. Right, your VC partner may not always be available. They have good insight,
Mm-hmm.
but they also have to manage other portfolio companies. So maybe you have their bandwidth is limited. But an angel investor, well, they're a lot more picky with who they invest into, and they usually don't invest that big, right? So, and for them, that the money means a lot more. But for me,
Right.
it's less about the money they're putting in. I think you can kind of relate it, and more about the advice they can offer. So I'm not sure if you had any similar experiences where your angel in India who were lending helped you build your lending platform, or at least from a product standpoint.
They definitely gave us some insights. I wouldn't say helped us build the platform or the technology because that was really something they didn't fully understand, but they did give us some insights into what worked and what didn't in terms of lending in the Philippines. So yeah, definitely I agree with you. Angel investors are super powerful because they can also connect you, they can open doors, like, and as you said, they have a bigger buy-in to your company, not absolute dollar wise, but like, relative to their own net worth. So
Exactly.
completely agree. I think it's really powerful. And I know that I don't invest a lot, but I've started angel investing, and I know that all the dollars I put into companies, I want them to turn into more dollars.
Yeah.
And I don't have the same expectations as VC, where I'm like, I'll try to find the one or two companies that are gonna become unicorns, that are gonna 100x my fund or my investment. I'll focus on every company and try to, 5x or 10x my investment. And I think that has a lot more value for the founder.
No, totally agree. I mean, I don't do angel investing myself, but I have realized their value over the years, and it definitely took time to, let go of the naivety on that. But I actually like angel investors quite a bit, and they can offer very hidden gems and advice. And quite often, the times, if they're a high net worth individual, they will know bigger funds that they can bring in later, or they will
Yeah,
recommend you, and that also goes quite far.
I agree. Cool. So, you went from being an engineer at Hyperloop, which I'm sure it's like a very interesting corporate setup. It's not your traditional blue chip company, so you're already kind of exposed to like the startup life a little bit.
Mhm.
But you made the plunge into being a full-time founder. Can you walk me through the mindset? I know you were in Santa Monica because of your logo, but like, tell me about what really drove you to build your own company. Is there a family background in entrepreneurship, or you just thought it was cool because you saw a movie, like The Social? Yeah, you know what I mean. Like a lot of people came from movies and news. Just curious about your own
Uh,
experience.
Honestly, I've been wanting to do something on my own, even during college. But I always told myself that unless the idea wasn't compelling enough, I wouldn't risk everything for it, right? And so when this idea kind of, the seed took hold of me in LA, I just researched more about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that led me to research, to actually plunge into this was mistakenly assuming that it would be easy. And that's probably I have two regrets in my founding career, and that's one of them. Is that assuming that it was just going to be a piece of cake. And the reason that I assumed this incorrectly is because when I learned more about startups and Shark Tank and investors and valuation, then I realized, oh, okay, look at all these silly ideas that are making money, right? There was an idea. There was one of the best podcasts I listened to is called it's Gimlet. It was a podcast called Gimlet, and the guy wanted to basically start podcasts in early 2010s. And so he is raising money for a podcast, and he records all the conversations he has in that journey. So the very first podcast they put out is how to not pitch to a billionaire. And it talks about his journey of building the company that he was raising funding for. And I was like, man, this guy raised $1 million for a podcast. I could raise $1 million for, something that's a lot more impactful to the world. So that kind of incorrectly led me to think that, it's easy. But the funny thing is, now that I go back and I listen to that podcast, everything he described in that podcast, the types of investors you meet, how some guys are at the early stage really looking at your books when you have no books, whereas other guys are looking at a grander vision, all that was true. And the investors I met have kind of fit the profile you mentioned. But yeah, the first regret I had was I just knew it would be easy. And I got all this information overload from my environment. And I went in the rabbit hole, and I said that, okay, look, at the time, I have no real big responsibilities. And when it comes to life, right? When it comes to family and kids, that was not the case for me at the time. And so it would either be now or never in my head. And if I didn't attempt this, I would regret it later in life. Although that did mean that I would have to leave the US where I'd spent my time and built my network. I would have to say bye to that and come back to Southeast Asia. In hindsight, I thought Indonesia was because it was good because I had grown up there, so I would have more reach. But in hindsight, that was also a false assumption. I think I could have done this anywhere because it was starting from zero regardless of where you went to. Mm-hmm. So that's I would say that's why I got into it. And it has, I'm sure you've sold 4 companies, right? So but it's not an easy journey.
Three,
it's
but
3 companies.
Maybe 4 one day.
But it's a very lonely journey, and that's my second regret. I never actually focused on a co-founder.
So you're a solo founder right now?
Correct. So this company has attracted a lot of talent, and I have other C-levels that are very competent, very smart. But it took time to find them, right? But early on in the first 3 years, it was just me, and that was, I think, my second regret, is that I never realized the importance of a solo founder, because in the first 3 years, when it's just flatlining, there's no up or down, it doesn't matter. But when you actually have something that, now that it is something and it could end at any point, that pressure and the ups and downs that you have as a founder after things have actually launched, to manage that, having a second or third party to do that with you, I think would go a long way. So the only thing I tell anybody is that if you really want to be a founder, don't. Definitely reconsider it, or get enough experience in your belt. Don't do it out of college. Get some experience.
Agreed.
And number 2, find a co-founder.
Okay, so I agree. I definitely agree with you. I started a company right out of college, and as much as it worked out, I recommend to anyone listening or anyone that I speak with to get a job. And I usually recommend, don't get a job in a big corporation, get a job in a startup that is somewhat successful, like let's say Series B and up, because you won't be a founder, but you will learn from people who are grinding. You'll understand how startup works. All the mistakes you could make, you'll learn from just seeing other people make them. So you can work for 2 years, get that experience, and then start your own thing. I think that's the best sort of route to do. And the co-founder thing is interesting to me because I've had 3 businesses with, whether it's one co-founder or multiple. So I kind of agree on the idea that you can rely on each other, you're accountable, all of that good stuff. I'm right now a solo, I wouldn't call myself a founder because I'm not building a product technically, but I'm a solopreneur. Whether it's for this podcast, for the growth program I have with the Startup Academy. It's so hard. So you've been doing it for 3 years. You're like on a much bigger scale too, because you've raised funds, you have all that pressure, you have a team. I'm like a solopreneur, but I already find it tough to kind of keep myself accountable, to kind of create my own vision, to stay on top of it. And so I really commend you there. And I agree with you. I think like I think that's why YC, one of their criteria is to have a co-founder, right?
Yeah.
I think only 10% of YC companies are solo founders or less. So there's definitely merit to it. So yeah, completely agree with you on that. Would like it's not unheard of people bringing in a co-founder level person at a later stage. Is that something you've considered, or you're kind of discounting that?
Actually, no, I think we are at that stage where the C levels that we have besides myself, they are basically my co-founders, right? So it took me time to get to that stage, but yes, that's why uh, we had to find really competent people that could do their specific job function really well. Because I think if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to change rooms. And so
Yeah, agree.
what I wanted to do when we were building the team is get people that were really good at one thing and just executing that one thing, even if they were, let's say, poor in the other aspects, because we're looking for our really great strengths rather than somebody that has zero weaknesses. And that has worked well. So yes, to answer your question, I'm at that stage now where I can comfortably say that my other C levels are basically my co-founders. But I think if I'd had that early on from day one and had just put in more effort in finding that co-founder, it would have been a lot better, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I'm really curious about is growth strategies, right? I'm a growth hacker, and as a CEO and solo founder, you're probably in charge of a lot of the growth of your business. So, can you walk me through some of the interesting strategies you might have come up with to scale your business within the Indonesian sort of landscape?
For sure, right? So none of this, what I'm saying is right. What I'm going to say is half from what I've done in the field and learn from the field, and half from what I learned from books and then I applied in the field at work, right? So not having co-founders, not having worked at a startup, which I think is super important. I want to just parrot your point that yes, definitely work at a Series B or above company, get that experience hands on, and don't do it right out of college, right? Unless you're Mark Zuckerberg and you just hit gold, it's very rare that you can kind of have a college company do really that well, right? So, where do you get experience from when you don't have any experience? You turn to other people. And so what I've done is I read quite a bit. I have built like an advisory circle of founders and exited founders rather, and older advisors who can give insight into what to do, what not to do, right? So using their experience, plus from what I've read, plus what's worked on the field, one thing that we had going for us, which helped today, is we were always so broke that we never had the option or luxury to grow at any cost.
Mm-hmm.
And that fundamentally allowed us to have our basic financial fundamentals in order before the tech winter bubble blew up, which meant that we were always chasing profitability from day one because I didn't have funding to keep the company going, as opposed to just grow. It's okay, we can discount and subsidize. As a result, what happened is our competitors literally started to die out as the tech winter bubble blew up, and we just started acquiring their clients. As a B2B company, clients is what drives us, right? And so they were ahead of us in terms of being first to market, but we were just more stubborn in sticking around and being better at managing our cash. As a result, even though we had an inferior product and less funding, we ended surviving, whereas they failed because they burned through their money in marketing and they burned through their money in subsidies. So the biggest growth strategy I can suggest is always be chasing for a profitable business model rather than a business model that you can kind of anybody can replicate and subsidize and beat you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's not that straightforward to just answer that question when you're thinking of an idea because you don't know the nuance of that idea. But definitely keep that in the back of your mind when you're building it and kind of treat every dollar that you have as if it's the last dollar you'll ever see. And so every funding round that I've ever gone into, I've assumed that this is the only money I will ever see, never again. So we need to make this last forever and approach profitability, right? So the way we fundraise is approach a level of profitability at each round. It gets bigger and bigger in terms of absolute value, yes, but the margin still stays the same. We're not breaking even, but we're getting very damn close to it. And the fundamental operational strategy that you're using will reflect that at every scale. So that's, I think, the single biggest growth strategy I can recommend. I mean, yeah, you can dive into a little bit nuances, but
Well, I'm curious about this because you mentioned, let your competitors die out and acquire their customers. How do you go about to acquire their customers as they're dying out? Because I think that's the secret.
uh, I think, how do you go about? Okay, so as a as a CEO, I don't like using that term because I think it's not really reflective. I think when I think of a CEO, I think somebody in the Fortune 500 company. I don't think of myself as a founder who is assigned to be a CEO of the company as opposed to, let's say, operating officer. I have two job functions in a B2B company. My job is or one job function, which is managing money. That can be broken into two segments. That's fundraising and that's revenue. And so that's exactly what I've done. And so how we manage to get our dying competitors' clients is by building the relationships needed to comfortably onboard that customer to you. Because you have to think about this, right? It's like when you're dating, this is somebody who's in a relationship and they've just broken up, and now you're going to convince them, hey, date me immediately, without any grieving period. And so that is worse for a B2B business because they have just seen a vendor collapse. So for them to then bring in the same vendor again under a different name can be very tricky. So having that rapport built really helps. And so for me, that literally means going and talking to customers on a face-to-face level. I'm talking C-level down to the operators, right? Because quite often the time, the ground level folks are the ones that really influence decision making at the top. So if you then go there and meet them, it shows that number one, you're serious about the business relationship, because in their minds, oh, the CEO is coming to see us. Right? And at least in Indonesia, I've seen hierarchy matters to people here.
For sure.
Which is just how it is. So use that to your advantage. If the environment which you're surrounding yourself in really cares about titles, use your title to an advantage. And so that has helped me in building relationships and strong relationships, not just superficial relationships. And then you really go and hear the customer's problem. The way we built this company and the direction we went into is by listening to what the customer wanted. We would put out a product, it would work 50% of the time, and it wouldn't work 50% of the time. And we would get feedback on it, and then we'd iterate and then do another product. And then the customer, the size of a large multinational pizza chain, saw this and saw that this company was willing to come back again and again with feedback that we gave them and go from there. And it basically built that relationship from there. And so I think listening to your customer and actually meeting your customer regularly under both formal and informal settings is super critical as a B2B enterprise company.
Love it. And you kind of describe it. You're doing in-person founder-led sales essentially, which I kind of preach founder-led sales. I just kind of leverage the digital platforms instead of doing one-on-one and in person. But yeah, I completely agree. It's funny because you're right. Southeast Asia is very hierarchy sort of driven, but the same applies to North America and Europe, regardless of if you want to agree with it or not. People will listen to Elon Musk because he's the CEO. He just has that founder power, and he's able to sell a lot more than his entire marketing department, whether it exists or not, depending on the companies we're talking about. So yeah, completely agree. I think founder-led sales is amazing, and more founders should focus on that rather than assume that sales should be done by sales department, marketing by marketing. The founder is the face of the company, and that should reflect a lot more. So yeah, I mean that's all the time we have for this episode. I really loved all the stuff you had to share. Before we go, do you have something you want to shout out to, whether it's personal or business related? I know you're fundraising, so maybe you have something you want to shout out there.
Nothing specifically, but yeah, I mean, we are fundraising. It's a pre-series A. We have a lead investor. If there's any VC listening to this, happy to have a chat for this round or the next round. But other than just shouting out my team, man, I mean, I'm the one. I often say that I'm the external face of the company, and so I get a lot of visibility. But don't be mistaken, right? Like the company is built by 90 individuals today, and that is why I can sit here in front of you and say, "Hey, we did this, this, and this, and that's what we're done." And so it's not a one-man show, definitely. And so I want to shout out my team, man, always.
Love it. Love it. Saivya, thanks so much for your time today. It was a real pleasure. And that's the pod.
Thanks so much, Tim. Thanks for having me.